So Lisa is a research scientist at the University of Florida, which is an extremely strong program in tropical biology and conservation. She's been working for a couple decades now, especially in South America, different parts of South America, but also Southeast Asia and other areas of the tropics. Lisa does a lot of work on using radio telemetry to try to understand animal migration, including some of the long distance migration and other nuances that are probably really important for the survival of migratory species. So without further ado, we'll turn things over to Lisa to tell us about updates on migration of South American waterbirds, the explosive migration of the black skimmer, and the highly predictable Orinoco goose. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Well, I would be really remiss if I didn't start off just by saying how happy we are to be back. And we see a couple familiar faces, but a lot of new faces. And yes, when we were here before, we got to interact a lot with the students. And we're not here for as long as some of the other visits, but I hope we all get to work together some. So yes, I have a slightly unwieldy title that I came up with at the last minute. That's partly because I know some of you here, especially the faculty, will have seen us talk about some of this. So some of it, like people were here with me while I was watching the first data of some birds going over the Andes, and I was all excited. So, to some extent, I'm updating those of you who already know what we've been doing, but I was also trying to make it somewhat complete for those who, of course, have never seen us speak here. And my first comment here is that this is definitely not all my work. This is a group effort extraordinaire. I am overseeing teams at 6 very small teams, 2 or 3 people and some assistants at about 6 different sites across the Amazon. I'm mostly going to talk about sort of the top 4 there in that circle, not so much about Bolivia or Pantanal today. And I started out this interest in studying migratory birds from work in Manu National Park, Peru, which is a field station. Well, Cotacacho is the field station within the park that John founded and we worked at for many, many years. And we got very interested when we realized that the Orinoco goose, which you'll see a lot more about, was actually probably the most threatened species in the park, and we knew nothing about where it went and what was going to happen to it. It's very small, about 30 animals, 30 breeding animals that we could find in the whole park. What would happen with no knowledge of where it went in the wet season. And that has spawned this really fun collaboration over many years. It's been 10, 15 years we've been working on this now. So just a brief outline. I'm going to, partly because of the students, and when I was here before we did a workshop, I always get questions about what's the latest technology. So I'm going to talk a little bit at the start about the different technologies we've deployed on the animals and some of what's working and some of what's not working. And if anyone has further specific details or questions, I'm obviously very happy to talk more afterwards. Here's just a very quick intro to some of the units we're using. The photo on the top right is a little 5-gram unit, probably from microwave telemetry, which is our main unit that we use on the Black Skimmer. And on the bottom is another satellite unit on an Orinoco goose that we're putting on. I will, of course, talk about some of our findings, some of the migrations we have found, and some really important questions for conservation are the stopover ecology of these birds and where we need to protect other than the obvious place in the breeding colonies. And one of our findings is that they're using a lot of human altered habitats. So I'll talk a little bit about what some of the implications of that are. And if I have time, conservation concerns and our future directions. So just to start off, why we're interested in studying animal movement. As I said at the beginning, it was sort of started out of an interest of managing some of the rarest species in Manu National Park. And obviously any migratory species is a concern for park managers. They can't necessarily protect a large enough population all year round. And so, because most parks are nowhere near big enough and don't encompass an animal's entire migratory path. This is particularly true for highly mobile animals like birds in particular. And then, as I said, the stopover ecology can be very important. Understanding migration phenomenon itself is just a whole fascinating world in itself. How are animals migrating? What are the senses that they use? It's not my specialty, but it's something that obviously I'm always fascinated in. There's been some amazing new results in the past decades. Disease ecology. Well, here we are. We haven't been here for 3 years because of disease probably spread by animals. And there's also some avian influenza that's badly affecting North America and Europe right now. Birds do have a potential to spread disease to humans. And some of the technology that you'll see today was developed to study bird flu, particularly in Asia. I don't include too much of that information in this version of the talk, but we do have some of this technology thanks to the concern about bird flu and how it's spreading. And finally, on migration, animals of all sorts provide ecosystem services and disservices from moving a seed of a short or a long distance, but also things like mercury that fish can carry through long distances. So obviously I have been very interested in this field and think there's a lot to be done here. Plus it's really fun to work in the field. So I got really fascinated with the idea of intra-tropical migrant birds. There's a lot more from the Americas between North and South America, but being a tropicophile, I really just wanted to look specifically at birds that stay in the Amazon area. Now, my birds don't always agree that they want to stay in the Amazon, which you'll see later, but in general, it is a really interesting system, and partly for the reason that this graph shows. This is from a beautiful book by Michael Goulding, who specializes in fishes of the Amazon. And this just shows, let's see if I can use this fancy, how these are the tributaries north of the equator, which is the red line. And so these have peaks that typically are in the middle of the year. And these are highly variable. If you could see these scale numbers, some will be like 5 meters, but some will be 25-meter changes at different parts. Whereas tributaries that are more south have the peaks in the water level more early and late in the year, typically. But anyways, it's a very complex calculus of how all this integrates together over the year. The water flows through very slowly, sometimes 6 months from one place to another. You may not necessarily have a rainy season that coincides with high water. So how are birds going to navigate all these different opportunities in an area with dry and high and low water seasons? So this makes it a little bit hard to predict what animals are going to do in this situation. So again, these are our two species that we started out with, partly because of this highly fluctuating river levels. These are birds that are dependent on the low water season when there are sandbanks available. So the Orinoco goose is a cavity nester, so it needs big trees, but it likes to feed on these wide open beaches that are only available to them for feeding in the dry season. The skimmer is even more dependent on these rivers, beaches, in that it actually creates a little scrape in the sand. We have this same species, but different subspecies in North America. It tends to use coastal and river, but less and less so riverine. But interestingly, in South America, it is almost exclusively known to nest on river beaches and never on the coast. So as I mentioned before, within Peru at least, the Orinoco goose is a considerable conservation concern. The skimmer is just a species using the same sort of ephemeral habitat, and obviously with a very different ecology. It's a piscivore rather than an herbivore like the geese. So they're sort of interesting to compare in those respects. Some views of our field sites. So this is where we got started, was the Manu National Park. It's there in southeastern Peru in the lowland Amazon, but very close to the Andes. The park is quite unique in that it protects the entire watershed of the Manu River, from high up in the Andes to down in the lowlands. So we're only working down in the lowlands, and the photo in the background shows these incredible meanders that in the low season have these point bars, let's see, at every point of the beach. So one there and one there. And these grow every year through channel avulsion, but they create these long beaches with nice, fresh green vegetation that's being used by the geese and the sand by the skimmers. Now, the Rio Juruá is another one of our Western Amazon sites. And I'm going to show you very shortly here data specifically comparing these two. And it's similar to the Rio Manu, except it's on a much bigger scale. So it's much lower down from the Andes. The Manu is obviously right up in the Andes or next to it. But here there's a much bigger river that you can take big houseboats in. The beaches are kilometers long and the lakes alongside are kilometers long. There's extensive programs there working with turtle nesting protection, and in those protected beaches you can get phenomenal numbers, just thousands of birds on a single one of these large beaches. So it's an excellent place to get a large sample size if we had the money to attach so many. But it has basically the same bird community as we had in Manu, the same geese, skimmers, and terns together. And then just before I start showing you some of the data from the West, the last Western site we have is in the Colombian Llanos. And so rather than a forested landscape, I mean, there is forest, but it's not tall forest, it's shorter. And the main feature here is the savannas and wetlands of the area. It's heavily used by cattle, but mostly unchanged in terms of they aren't planting non-native grasses. There is a lot of hunting of the predators, however, although not so much in the reserves we are working in. So that yellow oval shows where we have a couple of sites, mostly parallel to and near the Rio Meta, which is a major river in that area. And I should point out the top right photo shows that at least at some of the field sites, including one we just visited for the first time this last January, there are huge concentrations of the Orinoco geese in just one or two locales. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Unfortunately, as you fly over into the area, there is a changing landscape with oil palm becoming predominant. So that's the bad news. Otherwise, it's really gorgeous. Okay, so this I'm just going to show you the phenomenon of these very brief, like February and March. Everything you see out there is thousands of birds, and they're actually locally called pato corredor, which means the running duck. That's why. There's actually, it's funny, there's actually some black-bellied ducks in there too, so relative to your ducks. So we're in the boat, disturbing them a bit. And what's going on is that we think that these birds are congregating here by the thousands from where we don't know. When they are sensitive, they're sensitive to predation because they're molting. So they can fly. They aren't totally unflighted, but they are poor flyers at this stage. And so that may have something to do with why they congregate in the like 5,000 to 7,000. That's like a quarter of the world population right there in this place. Okay. Oh, I thought I was going to show Western results first, but I'll just keep showing you the field site. So Rio Branco, this is northern, about as north as you can get in Brazil, in the state of Roraima, right up against Venezuela and Guyana. And it is one of the few north-south oriented tributaries. Almost everything else is flowing east-west. So it's very important for migratory shorebirds, as I experienced myself this year when we came in the middle of the river rising. and we couldn't keep up with all the birds getting into the nets as they were moving with the high water. It has a very strong rainfall gradient from north to south. It's dry. It's also savanna, like the Colombian llanos in the northern part. And then in the south, it gets very wet down towards Manaus. It actually, the river ends up near Manaus. And so it has diverse water qualities too. You can see this meeting of the waters where there's sort of white water with clear water mixing. It's getting lots of tributaries from the sides of different sorts. So there's a lot of, we were just talking about beta diversity in Australia. There's a lot of beta diversity in the water types and the plant types. So it's the main field site of my colleague Luciano Naka, who's interested in bird, mostly evolution in this landscape. But he agrees to help me because he's gotten addicted to the tagging data too. So as I said, I don't know, 10 minutes ago, I was going to do a section to talk about some of the equipment. So here are two very different examples. So the top one is a collar. It's a GSM collar. It gives you data whenever the bird is near a cell phone tower, and it does have a solar panel. So in theory, this could go for a long time. And we deployed these particularly in the Rio Branco in the last place I showed you, because the first year of data showed them going near Boa Vista, so the main city. So we thought that we could get good data through cell phone services. And it did work to a point, but unfortunately, most of them only gave us a month or two of data before they stopped, and we don't really know why. On the bottom is what has been our workhorse sort of model, which are microwave telemetry. That's the company's PTTs. That's platform terminal transmitter, which means nothing, but it's the term they use. But this is a satellite unit that doesn't need a cell tower. You put it on the bird, it gives you a fix every 2 hours, every 2 days. The accumulated data of those 2 days comes to your email through the Argos satellite service. So these are amazing. They're very high accuracy, 18 meter. And you put them in a nodding protocol, sort of like a backpack strapped to the bird. I think there are some close-ups of this. For the skimmers, we are also using a backpack style. We've never used a collar. That's not really recommended for them or for most seabirds. But we've tried out 3 different models. And again, the best one has been these microwave telemetry ones, which is the one picture on the top, sitting on the back of a bird. There's a very interesting program, I won't go into too much, called the Icarus initiative. And these have for years been promising to be a much lower cost model of essentially a satellite telemetry system, but it's not actually talking to a satellite, it's talking to a computer on the International Space Station. This works particularly well in the tropics because you will get year-round coverage through the International Space Station. If the bird were to go outside the tropics, you actually do lose coverage. I don't know how many people know the path of the International Space Station, but that's the way it works. But as soon as the bird would come back to the tropics, it stores the data so you could get it all. We were able to get some test units of this project. It's actually a nonprofit project, so they are about 1/10 of the cost, and they also have GPS rather than Argos type data. So the precision is like 30 meters rather than, I didn't mention before, but the top units sometimes will be 1 kilometer away from where you are. So they're not that useful always for like feeding studies and stuff like that. Also with the Icarus tags, you get accelerometer data. The only problem is that collaboration on the International Space Station was between Russia and Germany, and since the Ukraine war, the data has been held hostage by Russia because the unit is on the Russian side. So I won't be able to show you too much data of that, but if anyone wants to talk about that further, I can talk about it later. But basically, we put these units on birds through some system, either a satellite, the International Space Station, or a cell tower. We get data into our email, and that's really pretty amazing. And you get addicted when it's coming in every couple days and something exciting is going on. But there's been huge differences in how well these various models have worked for us. And so, as I said, the microwave telemetry, the MTI backpacks have been our go-to units. The cost is 3 to 5 times higher than any of the other options. But okay, so these data show the average and then the range. So like the minimum number of points I got after deploying on a bird to the maximum. So you can see I've had up to about 20,000 points as a maximum on some of the birds with the goose backpacks. The skimmers tend not to last as long, so our highest is about 2,500 points. So some of those Orinoco Goose backpacks have stayed on for 5.5 to 6 years. We've rarely gotten anything longer than a year on a skimmer. But some of those other units are performing like we would get 16 points on average with low tech. We gave up on those. I don't know why. Other people have worked with those fine. I think it might be the temperature and heat. They just aren't as resistant in our conditions. So anyways, I won't belabor this too much, and then the Icarus were only test points. We're only test units with just 1 point a day, and it ended too soon. So that is not actually representative of the potential if they could get it started, which they are restarted, which they're trying to do with NASA. So what have we learned between these huge differences in like successful deployments? So sometimes we get 2 points or a week of data, and sometimes we get 5 years of data using the same units and methods. Well, a lot of it, I think, is luck, whether the animal gets predated or is really aggressive at ripping off its unit. But I do know of some instances in which the birds have been harmed, particularly on release. So they are going to act strange, they're going to fly strange, they're going to swim strange, and predators notice this. So I know at least one instance where we know a bird was taken by a caiman almost immediately after. So again, especially for students, I am willing to talk about this more, but some of the lessons learned are that you really need to do as much prep work as you can ahead of time before you start putting tags on. The best I would recommend is banding and just learning their behavior, especially on release. Every species is different, and you just don't really know till you're there in the field with a wild bird. That said, you can do a lot of prep working with captive animals and get a sense of how to put the harnesses on carefully. Also, I think an important point that I would highlight here is that females have survived a lot better. And, particularly in the geese, the males fight. And maybe in the skimmers, the males are taking their harnesses off. But you will see in our data that well, actually, you won't be able to read the names because it's too small. But a lot of the birds that survive and give us the longest data sets have been females. So obviously, we're getting a slightly skewed view, but that's what we can do at the moment just because of the way it's working for us. Okay, so I'm finally going to show you some data, and you all are sort of guinea pigs because I'm trying this with a new program called Firetail, which is really kind of a cool, easy to use program for animal tracking data. You put in the data, and it's specifically meant to work with MoveBank. So for those who don't know, MoveBank, the Icarus project, and this Firetail program are all closely related scientists who are working together in Germany. And so this is a sort of standalone program that you can use. So I'm going to start the video, and what this is even if I have a 5-year data set, I've condensed it into about 2 years. Oh, sorry, this one is a 1-year set, just from the geese from 2 field sites, Juruá and Manu in Peru. And well, I'll just get it started because this one's pretty self-explanatory. So you first see these little birds that just have local movements prior to migration from Peru and then the Juruá. So what you can see is they're tagged in the dry season, and then in the wet season, they're going down to the Llanos de Mojos. So this is another place sort of like our Colombian field site that's rather than forest, it's a savanna and wetland area that's just great for water birds. And so in this part of South America, we're getting a very predictable convergent migration into the Llanos de Mojos for the whole wet season, and then returning to their breeding sites. And some of the points that are obvious is that these are, they're converging on Bolivia and the Llanos de Mojos there. These are true round trip, long distance migrations, but also what you can't necessarily see in those close-ups, but I'll show you in some other graphs. There is very strong site fidelity, both they go back to the very same beach that I tagged them on, and also across individuals and across years, they have some very, they're very faithful to certain stopover sites. So this is one of our records of a bird from Peru that gave us a 5.5-year record. I tagged her in the upriver part there on the left, and then that's on the right, her movements in Bolivia each year. And I'm going to focus in a little bit there just to show you some of the stopover ecology. So not only she, but the other couple of birds that we've done in Peru, and because they're so threatened, we've actually stopped tagging any there. Every year going in and out, they all stop at one lake in Llanos de Mojos. There are thousands of lakes in Llanos de Mojos. Why they go every single year to this one lake is a complete mystery to me. It's just a stupid farmer's lake with cows around it. So I have no idea, but it's very important to the geese and from Peru. And similarly, the birds from Brazil tend to always go to a lake up a little bit further east. And then later in the year, they all converge down in the south. I hope you kind of saw that, but without in the video. This is a regular pattern we're seeing every year from all the birds that we are tracking. Now, to compare with our other sites in the west, but northwest, north of the equator from Colombia, we do not get any sort of long distance repetitive migration like that. We are getting that they stay in a regional area between the Rio Meta and the Rio Casanare, no matter where we tag them. We have tagged them in different places there, including right on the banks of the Rio Meta in the far, in the lower corner there. And we've also tagged in a couple of places, but they all end up in this central area. And so similarly, and so more similar, the other sites for geese are more similar to the Colombia site, staying pretty local. But I will start this video now. So here I'm showing you the rest, pretty much the rest of the goose data dumped into this one big video from Colombia, Rio Branco, and Rio Araguaia there in the east. And again, you'll see the little dots moving around. And then this time though, I'm going to zoom in at some point to the Rio Araguaia site. So you may be able to see in the top right, the Rio Branco is the only place where there's actually a true migration, but it's a pretty small distance. So they actually do go from the forested sites up into the savanna. And this is starting in about January. So here I'm focusing in on the Araguaia. So here it's also very small scale migration, but all the birds are moving at this point in about January, February into a very small area of rice fields. They do this every year. So now that's 1 year, and then there's going to be another year where they go back up north around the Rio Araguaia and they do their breeding. But then at some point here, we're coming up on January again. So they all go back again into that one very small area, which if you didn't notice, it's zoomed out again. But because we had this tracking data, our local collaborator, Renato Pinheiro, started undertaking monthly censuses of the birds. And he followed them to this rice field location. And he was shocked at what he found, because it wasn't just our bird. It was thousands of birds, which is several times more than we were able to count on an extensive aerial count and boat-based count in another season. So birds are coming in from all other places we don't know of, from far away, not on the Araguaia. So this is just some of Renato's data showing that these are our annual censuses, monthly censuses by boat and by air, and they stay very low. So this is rice fields, the dark circles. And when the water is high, so this is the river level here, but pretty much in February and March, they go to the rice fields and then they go back. But every year they're doing this. Every year they're showing up in huge numbers in a very small area. Yeah, sorry, the back, this previous one, he mentioned it's in a 650 hectare area. It doesn't matter if they've planted rice. It doesn't matter if there's no rice. Nothing seems to matter except that it's that place every year. So this is why we're thinking it's not necessarily that they're feeding on the rice. It's more something akin to the Colombia molting congregation, we believe, possibly for the safety in numbers. But that's still a hypothesis. We don't know if they're eating rice or not. So that is something for our future interests and studies. Okay, I think this is the last video. And it's the most complicated for me to talk about. If I have time, that's good. And it's probably too dark, I'm sorry, but it's the outline of South America. And the colors are chlorophyll measurements. This is an option in the Firetail program to show the seawater chlorophyll. So that's a proxy for productivity. And so this is, sorry, I should have also said, this is the skimmer data. This is going to show you on a big scale of South America, where they are starting, where they are going to outside of the breeding season, because I start on breeding grounds, and how that relates to the changes in chlorophyll along the coasts. So I hope you can make out that outline, even though it's a little bit dark. And I will try to make some points as this video runs. So it starts out with our skimmers in, oh wait, John is telling me stop. I don't know how to turn the light out, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be easier to see.
We're gonna try.
Okay, that'd be helpful. That looks so calm. I've never used them.
Oh yeah, it's on the screen.
It's on here. Sorry.
Oh.
Okay, maybe this will help. Yeah, thanks.
Got that?
Okay. I don't know if that makes much difference. Anyways, that is South America. Those little dots will start to show up of this guy. And from the same field sites I've showed you, all the breeding grounds. And let's hope we can get this started. It starts out in January. It's 2 years. Again, I've compressed our data so that if I have a longer data set, then I've actually put some birds in twice. Although actually I think with the skimmers that didn't really happen. So anyways, I'll get, shoot, that didn't work. Let's see here. Okay, it's going, that's good. Okay, so we start off in Colombia, just because January is the best time to tag them. And then comes in the Rio Branco birds. And so yeah, they're just doing local movements. There is our first ever Andean crossing by a Colombian bird. It went to a lowland area, now is heading over to Panama. And then you can see the Rio Branco birds. Some of them went to the coast, but one went way south over towards Peru. There are two groups in that in those birds. So there go all the birds from Rio Branco over to the coast. They're in the Guianas, Suriname, and also to the coast of Brazil, Amapá here. And one of the important things to point out is that these two are the only birds that have we've ever seen cross the equator. Okay, so now we're mid-year, and the tracking data from Peru is coming. So this is dry season in Peru. There's some birds from Araguaia coming in the east. And then the skimmers go kind of crazy and go in every direction, north, south, east, and west, and several of them cross the Andes and go to the coast of Peru. I don't know if you can see, but the bands of blue, which is higher chlorophyll along the coast, are at their best in that time when the Peruvian birds are going. So the Araguaia bird has now gone south. We fully expected it to go to the coast down there once it got there, but it did not do what we wanted. But there's a crazy move right there. South, one skimmer left the coast of Peru and went down the coast of Chile to Concepcion. It did a 34-degree change in latitude. It went to a bay that's famous for penguins to also go to and use the high productivity fishery there. Okay, so now we're in March and April. Yeah, so those birds have to get back to their breeding ground on the rivers. So they're starting to head north. And they're crossing the Andes again. And the Araguaia bird just goes and breeds. The others go and wander around for a bit. I'm not sure if those birds didn't breed that year, if the conditions were bad or what, but we do then see towards the end of this video, bigger movements than you might expect. They're going from the Rio Juruá, which is where we tagged them, up into the main river itself, up into the Amazon, and circling around and going back and forth. So I will stop that and try and highlight again some of the points you may have missed in the chaos of that video, but anyways. So the Peruvian birds are going to be in the austral summer. So they leave the breeding grounds. They're actually breeding in what is the winter there. So they go down to some of the most high productivity areas in the austral summer, down to the Gulf of Arauco, Chile, the penguin place, Mar Chiquita, which our bird didn't quite reach, but we know is an important place for skimmers. They show up there in large numbers. Then the Peruvian coast. So this was actually the first demonstration of skimmers on the Peruvian coast coming from the Amazon. Most people thought they were coming from North or Central America when they showed up in large numbers on the coast. I think this is the main thing that skimmers do, is to cross the Andes and go to the coast because of the famous productivity of fisheries on the Peruvian coast there. However, our bird from Colombia went into the Parita Bay, Panama. That is actually at the time when the productivity there is lower, but I'll talk a little bit about that more. And the other group of northern birds went over to the northeastern coast where productivity is also famously high. So about that skimmer that went to Panama, even though the productivity in that region isn't necessarily at its highest, what it's doing in that area, actually, it has not left this area for months. It is just eating in some shrimp farms that are very common in the coast of Panama there. We also found this from an analysis, which is in the paper I referenced below, for the birds that stayed in the Peruvian coast. They're always out at the outlets of fresh water, but particularly where there's shrimp farms. So as I said at the very beginning, I'm going to show you some information about birds depending on human-altered habitats. This is just a graph I found of Parita Bay, the bay they're in, and the changes in mangroves and shrimp farms, with the mangroves in red from, I don't know if you can read the numbers. Top is 1987 to 98, 2009, 2019. So mangroves actually haven't been lost that much, but shrimp farms are growing. There's a lot of actually just dirt and mud that has been changed into shrimp farms. What's sad is those shrimp farms are in the middle of a national park, and they're actually really important archaeological relics there. But that's what's happening, is turning into shrimp farms. But at least the skimmers are enjoying them. The other way in which skimmers are using human-modified habitats, which you couldn't see at the scale in particular, but this is also Rio Meta, Colombia. This is data from the Icarus units, so high precision GPS data. And they're nesting right then on the beaches of the Rio Meta, and all their feeding bouts are going into cattle farms in the interior. They are not feeding along the river, which surprised me quite a bit. You can also see that even though the accuracy is lower on the MTI points, these are probably all in the same exact point, even though there's the spread, but they are also feeding very little on the river. And then I like to point out about the high Andes crossing. So this was, as I said, the first time that people knew that birds along the coast were coming from the interior. The passes they are choosing also is kind of interesting because they do not go for the lower passes. They're going over some of the highest passes in the Andes. So I mapped where these two birds in particular are going, this crossing and the passes they go over. And here's a photo of where they're going. So one is over Sabina Cocha at 4,900 meters. It's covered in glaciers. And another, there's a lake there, Penina Cocha, with Volcan Sada nearby. So the birds are crossing these in incredibly high 5,000 meter areas. So I'll just sum up here, and I did want to leave some time for questions. So despite these small sample sizes, which especially since we're dividing it up over several field sites, we've been able to uncover some new migration systems using these satellite telemetry systems. The Western Amazon geese and also the Rio Branco to a lesser degree are undertaking some regular predictable annual migrations, mostly going from forest into savanna areas. The geese in Colombia and Araguaia, however, are just staying pretty locally, but they still have these notable seasonal concentrations in rice fields and elsewhere, and cattle areas. I didn't spend too much time on this in the videos, but you can see the skimmers and the geese. Well, the geese from the Western Amazon are all spending months in the Llanos de Mojos, but the skimmers are actually going through there a fair bit as well. So this is a very interesting site that, because of its location, sort of right at along the base of the Andes, it's funneling a lot of birds in there. So we're calling it Grand Central Station for migration in that region. And I think it's just a very interesting location for studies of migration of wide variety of species. And then finally, that human activities and artificial habitats are likely already changing some of these movements, and they're feeding, although we're still wondering about those use of rice fields. And is that just culture in the birds that they always went there anyways? Or are they really in these areas because they're eating rice? So the skimmers, as I said, demonstrate this explosive or centrifugal migration. We're still trying to decide which word we like best. So you can weigh in what you prefer. We haven't published that yet. That they're a very long distance in both Trans-Andean and huge distances across the whole continent. Yet they have preferred crossing points in the Andes, and they're also to a large extent niche switching between freshwater to saltwater. All of our birds are showing pretty strong site fidelity to their breeding grounds. They always return there, even if in the case of those birds at the end of the last video, they don't necessarily stay and breed every year for reasons we don't completely understand. I think I have maybe 1 minute to talk about conservation threats. So the Llanos de Mojos, which was so important to the geese and somewhat to the skimmers, is a Ramsar site that's supposed to be protected for migratory birds, but 98% of it is actually in private ranches, and there's not a single park guard because it's all private land. So it's the epitome of a paper park, which is something we're often worried about. Also, the increase of palm oil is huge in some of these areas, and also, of course, some of these reasonably unaltered cattle lands are beginning to intensify and put in foreign grasses. The use of the shrimp farms by the birds is a repeated thing we're seeing. And of course, you worry about chemical contamination. But one of the things that our teams in general are most worried about is these strong seasonal concentrations of the geese, the more threatened species, and these molting, what we think are mostly for molting congregations. They're short term. There's no other reason to be there necessarily there and nowhere else. Unfortunately, we know in Brazil that farmers do illegally poison the large groups of birds that come into rice fields. And so, especially when they're in the company of whistling ducks, which they can be, which come by the thousands as well. So it's possible that if there was a large poisoning event of these birds in these tiny areas, that you could have very significant decrease of important populations. Finally, in one of our sites in the Rio Branco there in Roraima, there is a plan for a new dam, the Behaviour Dam, to power the state of Roraima. They have lost power that was produced by Guri Dam in Venezuela, so they're looking for alternatives. In the process of putting together a proposal for the dam, downriver, so actually they're going to flood the area that the geese are using when they go north into the savanna, but the downriver effects are not required to be analyzed in the environmental impact assessment. So this is a problem for all those birds using that shore, that flyway that need beach habitats that provides feeding, the insects and all. So there are examples, for example, in the Zambezi River of the African skimmers there being badly affected by the downriver effects of dams. So this is something else. So just in future directions, almost all those things I just told you in conservation concerns are the focus of our what we hope to do in the future. So working on the Behaviour Dam downriver effects, looking at a MODIS setup, which is another type of way to study migratory birds in the Llanos de Mojos, that Grand Central Station. And then feeding ecology and whether, and looking more at what birds are doing in those very concentrated congregations. And of course, it would be extremely interesting to tag those birds, even though it's harder when they're not on the breeding grounds, but tag them and see where they're going to, since we don't know where they're coming from. So that's about the end of the talk, and I am very happy to entertain any questions. Thank you very much.